Good day and welcome to this session of Typify Scripts and Scripting webinar. In the previous session, we dealt with how scripts can interact with the Typify Engine. And today we'll deal with the second major component of Typify scripting, namely the Typefi Document Object Model, or the DOM, which is how we interact in our scripts with Typify items such as elements, fields, and sections. In other words, it gives us scripting access to the Typefi Designer plugins. There are two Typify entry points into the scripting DOM, Typify Settings and Autofit Settings. And today we'll deal only with Typify Settings, and Autofit Settings we'll deal with in a separate episode. Many InDesign objects have the Typify Settings property, for example text frames, as you can see in the ESTK's Object Model Viewer, which is here. You can open it through the Help menu or by pressing F1. Or any alternative viewer, such as the one mentioned earlier. I'll show you its address again. It's over here. It's also printed in the script version, and it's also mentioned in the scripting resources. The Typify Settings property is a single property, but it takes on different guises depending on the InDesign object you view it with. So if we first go to select InDesign here, I'll go to the 2018 part. So if I go to text frame, for example, here, I see the InDesign properties of the text frame object, but not only InDesigns, but also over here, Typify Settings. And through these Typify Settings, so a text frame gives Typify page item settings. If you go to Typify page item settings, like here, you see there are various properties and functions. For example, page items anchor, whether an element, properties of the element, if it's an element, and so forth, frame type, and preferences. But we'll concentrate on element for the moment. So if we take, for example, we go to documents here, I've got a document with an element. This is a float. So if I say selection, I select the frame so I can talk to it. 0 Typefi Settings. I press F5, run. It says page item settings. Now, one of the page item settings is, for example, element. So I can say element. I press again. It says Typify element page item, which is over here. So element. I click here to go to the Typify element page item property, and here I have again anchor point, definition, all sorts of things, and I have, for example, name, which is always easily accessible. So if I do name, it says photo. So this is the way to get to an element's name. There's a property here, for example, variant definition. No, I'm looking for variant name, for example. Variant name is undefined, as you can see here, because we didn't define it. But if we say, for example, top here, and now we do variant name, we get top. So that this is one way into the Typify object model. If you choose a different object, for example, page, page. You go to Typify Settings. It says Typify Page Item Settings. As you can see here, if we go to the page item settings, like here, see there aren't all too many properties connected to Typify Page Item Settings. It's just these here. But if we look at the functions, there is one very important one, and one that you'll use very often, main story frame. So this, I'll hide this for a moment. So in an InDesign script, we would, as normal, let's define our mini Typify object. I'll start with that again. See the previous session for details. So remember that we don't have an engine, so this is the way you would talk to a page in an InDesign job, but we don't have an engine. So as we saw in the previous session, we just create our own object for the moment. And now I can say Typify IND page, Typefi Settings. I'll run this for the moment and see what happens. This is page item settings. And now in order to get the main story frame, I'll say main story frame. It's a function. So there. And it says, oh, this goes wrong. Main story frame. Main story frame is a text frame. Just to make sure that we indeed get what we were looking for, we just say, for example, select, and now we can see that you see here the main story frame is selected. I'll just do that again. Nothing selected. I run this, and it selects the main story. This line is probably in the top 10 of most used Typify script lines, because virtually any script, especially page end scripts, will at some stage look for the main story on a page. All these Typify settings relate to the Typify plugins, so sections, elements, fields, etc. And virtually anything that you can do in the UI, you can do via scripting. So the Typify plugins work like all scriptable plugins. So let's explore a little further. For example, I mentioned that we often need to get a handle on the main story on the page, and this is how you do this. If there is no main story, this function will return null. So if we say, we bind this to a variable, we say main frame is MF. The MF is the main story frame on a page. And the first thing you would do in a script is to say, if not MF, then return. You're probably somewhere in a function, and you bail out straight away. And so this is looking for the main story frame, because that's only one type of the Typify item. So now we'd like to go to see how we look for an element. So how would we go about finding an element of a particular type on a page? So you get all frames on a page, and if it's an element, check whether it's a float, and if it's a float, whether it's a particular variant. So in a script, we do that as follows. We start again with this. I'll put it in a function because this is something that we're going to use a lot. I'll say function find element. First thing is we get all the frames on a page. This is the page, the current page that the engine is composing, and which is the page that we see in front of us. And we get all its page items into an array. Then we loop through these frames. And then we say, if, so I'm looking for this photo I should have mentioned. We're looking for a photo on a page. If frames, the frame that I'm looking for, or the frame that I have at this particular iteration, element name is photo, then return this particular frame. We've got what we found. Just in case the page doesn't have any photo element, we'll have to return, say we return null. You must make sure that if you're looking for something, you must always return something, even if it's null. And now we can call this function. For example, we say my photo is find element. Find element. Says it's a rectangle. Have we found what we looking for? Of course, then if my photo, which is short for this, then my photo, let's select the photo, see whether we really found it, there. So if the page contains a photo, select it, and there you are. It selected the photo. Let's do it again. There we go. Oh, by the way, you can't see that because I pressed F5, which is shortcut for run. There we go. This works fine. It works here in the interface interactively. However, this will often, if not always, not work in a running job. And that's because during a document's pagination, the Typify engine keeps floating elements on a special InDesign layer. You won't see that layer because it's created by the engine at document start, and it's deleted when the job finishes after document end. So you can actually see it sometimes if a document crashes during pagination. So floats are kept on that pagination layer, and you must therefore make sure that when you're looking for a float or for an element, that you don't find the one that is on that pagination layer. Because if you do, then you find the float, you think, okay, I've got a float here. The float isn't yet on the page, it's on the pagination layer. Now you think that you've found it, you do all sorts of things with it, and you carry on, and at some stage the pagination layer is deleted and your element isn't there anymore. That often happens when you place items, but when you find items, you must be aware of that too. Now, the name of that layer is TPS pagination layer. So in order to make sure that we find the element on the page while it's no longer on the pagination layer, we add a condition, frames item layer name TPS pagination layer. I'll make that a bit clearer. And this works interactively, even though we don't have a pagination layer. Here. So working with floats, it's always important that you take into consideration the pagination layer. But equally, you must stay away from the pagination layer when you add a page item to any page. And it turns out that most of the time, the pagination layer is the active layer because that is what the engine usually works with. So, for example, you must always make sure that when you add a page item to a page, that you don't put it on the pagination layer. Suppose that you wanted to place a mask on a photo, simply by placing a rectangle or a text frame with the same geometric bounds on it. So what we do is we'd say my photo is find element, and if we now say to add an item, to add a rectangle or a text frame on that photo, we say Typify INDD page text frames add. The best way in this case to avoid the pagination layer is to place our text frame on the same layer as the photo, because we know that the photo is not on the pagination layer. So we say my photo item layer, and we make it the same geometric bounds as the photos. Geometric bounds. And the fill, so we make it black so we can actually see the frame. Fill color black, and this should of course go here. Like this. I'll run it like this, and there we are. Now we know for sure that this thing is going to stay where it is. If you don't make sure that it's off the pagination layer, there's a very good chance that you place it on the pagination layer and a document and that layer is deleted, and along with the layer, all page items on that layer are deleted as well. So you lose all your masks. This concludes this session. In the next episode, we'll present a case study in which the items discussed in this session will be brought together, and we'll do that in a script that ensures that floating elements are placed in their own text section. Thank you.